Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the CSPC pre-conference Zoom session for 2023. Today's session is titled Charting the Innovation Ecosystem, Setting the Stage for Collaborative Innovation Ecosystem. I'm Matt Pereira, and normally I hold the title of Senior Strategist at eCampus Ontario. However, today I am your moderator. And before we begin, let us recognize the land that that eCampus Ontario operates on. We are situated on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. This acknowledgement reminds us of the continuous need to build on the present and the future and the foundations of knowledge and respect for the past. And so, with a nod to history and an eye on the horizon for innovation, let us come together in the pursuit of a vibrant and collective future. With the stage set today for an insightful exploration, I'm excited to guide us through the interconnectedness of constellations of the research and development and the fusion of diverse experiences and perspective that sparks the brightest innovations. As we find ourselves in the era marked with swift technological changes and advancements and societal shifts that are happening rapidly, we acknowledge that the true innovation transcends mere innovation and invention, but it's about a culture, a commitment to fostering an ecosystem where collaboration thrives and all voices are heard. Before we dive in, I wanted to share a little bit about myself and my role at eCampus. I've had a unique privilege of working alongside many individuals from diverse backgrounds and different players in the innovation space. And these leaders are at the forefront of their fields. And from these experiences, it's been a really great experience to understand and appreciate the interconnectedness of our work and how everyone is moving this innovation space the same direction. And hopefully it starts to include more individuals from diverse backgrounds that will ultimately affect the larger picture of the ecosystem and contribute to innovation at its core. Today we have the pleasure of hearing from experts who stand at the intersection of academia, industry, and policy to discuss and build on a robust and inclusive innovation ecosystem. They bring with themselves a wealth of knowledge and insights that promise to shed some light on how we can really leverage the collective strength that we all bring and addressing the challenges not only of today, but also tomorrow and in the future. We'll hear from Chris Galifianakis of the City of Toronto, Giselle Roberts of Laurentian University, Peter Cowan with Intellectual Property Ontario, IPON. And each of these panelists have a unique role to play in the innovation ecosystem, and I look forward to sharing their insights along with the questions that come from the audience. Our goal here today is not just to chart the ecosystem, but really to identify different ways to engage in it and fostering growth and opportunity. We are all part of this constellation, and today we look forward to being able to provide you with valuable insights and actionable knowledge that will actually help you navigate and contribute to the space effectively. So with that, I would like to introduce each one of the panelists and then give a little bit of their background. So we'll start off with Giselle Roberts of Laurentian University.
Thanks, Matt. So I'm Giselle Roberts. I'm the Director of Research and Innovation here at Laurentian University. I started my career 16 years ago at Laurentian. Just recently, November 1st was my anniversary. And, it's been an interesting career for me. I started off as a tech transfer officer when I was first hired. And since then, my role has evolved to include research administration, but I still remain the lead on all commercialization activities. And I was at an event on the weekend, and they talked about in leadership and what is your superpower. And I think for me, it's always been the building relationships. I think when we're talking about ecosystems, for me, it's always been about relationships. And, I've been very privileged throughout my career that from the beginning, I've worked in partnership with other institutions. Initially, we were funded through what was called the Ontario Partnership for Innovation and Commercialization. So we were a network of 7 universities that supported each other in their commercialization activities. And, eventually, I was also funded through at the time it was OCEs, which is now OCI, the On-Campus Entrepreneurship Activities Program. And that was a partnership with the two colleges here in the city. And as you know, we're currently the lead on a partnership with three other universities focused on providing commercialization support and doing asset mapping. So yeah, so that's just a little bit about me. And again, you know, my role has evolved to include research as well as commercialization, but very proud to represent Laurentian and be here. So thank you for the invitation.
Amazing. Thanks, Giselle. And wanted to introduce Peter Cowan of IPON.
Thank you very much, Matt, and as well as Chris and Giselle. Good to chat again on these topics. So I'm Peter Cowan, the CEO for IP Ontario. For those of you that don't know, IP Ontario is a new government agency, provincial agency, really structured to help build capacity and talent when it comes to intellectual property inside the ecosystem, both from researchers, small and medium-sized businesses, as well as entrepreneurs. And we're also structured to help companies with IP funding. We have an IP funding program that's very similar to some other funding programs, but IP specific to help with patent filings, licensing support, and things like that. So I'll talk a little bit about where that weaves into the collaborations. And IP Ontario is structured as a organization that really comes behind companies and puts these supports into place. And our goal is to be able to create economic prosperity with intellectual property as part of the story.
Amazing, Peter. Yeah, excited to talk more about IP because I feel like in a lot of the conversations that I have with businesses, there's still a lot of mystery around it, how to access it, and the value of it. So excited to continue those conversations. And Chris from the City of Toronto.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for having me here today. Chris Theophilo-Giannakos. I'm a Policy and Partnership Advisor with the City of Toronto Strategic Partnership Office, which is in the City Manager's Office. I have my PhD in history, and I started my career in heritage and culture, working in the city with museums. And a large part of my role there was to help to foster collaborations and partnerships with the city's diverse communities, helping to share stories and the voices, again, of the city's diverse population. And I think kind of moving into my new role in strategic partnerships, an important part of what I brought from my past interests is that a large part of innovation and collaborations is creating a space where diverse voices, diverse experiences can come together. And I think that's where Toronto has been able to take advantage of where it's located, and our academic institutions that bring in all these international students is, as a city, we've helped to create a program with Civic Lab TO, which we'll talk about a little bit later, where we foster research projects with our universities and colleges and help to bring these diverse experiences, diverse voices into the programs that we're doing, to support the programs that we're building, and to support policy making and decision makings that impact the community. So yeah, thanks again for having me here, and I look forward to our discussion.
Amazing. Thank you, Chris. And we look forward to the discussion with all of the attendees today. So we will incorporate your questions into the discussion. So feel free to send them in during the conversations or at the end. And we'll be sure to get those questions out in front of the panelists to start to have a little bit more conversations as well. So excited to look through the Q&A as that happens. The focus here really is about understanding how each of us play a part in this innovation ecosystem. And understanding the state of collaboration and the state of innovation in Ontario and Canada, and focusing on how to build on what we already have. I mean, Chris, you make a great point talking about the diversity in Toronto, but across the country as well. It is really amazing to see all walks of life coming from all around the world and contributing to innovation in Canada, and being able to incorporate these ideas and thoughts that might not necessarily come from a Western lens, and might be able to influence us for the good. So being able to incorporate that, I think everyone has a voice and everyone has an ability to contribute to innovation. And we certainly can't just look internally to solve all of the issues that we have, and especially when moving into the future of a global community, being able to understand the needs and wants of individuals, incorporating their communities into the decision making, I think is increasingly more important. Chris, I think, as we look to get this conversation started here, we have 3 different topics that we want to talk about: the state of collaboration in Ontario, the roles of private-public partnerships and fostering innovation, and looking at diversity and inclusion in the innovation ecosystem. I'm sure more will come up through conversations that happen in the Q&A, and if we have time, we'll add on an additional one about the next generation for innovation. But given your role as a strategic role in the City of Toronto, what kind of trends and patterns have you observed in urban collaboration ventures, and what unique challenges and opportunities does this bring, not only to the city, but also businesses starting up in the city?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Since I joined the strategic partnerships team, I guess a couple of years ago, really there's been a motivation to broaden collaborations across sectors, industries, both private and public within the city, specifically to foster innovation, to face the growing list of challenges in the city, specifically around housing, climate change, health and resiliency. And it's important that the city has recognized that we do need to have new ways of thinking to increase opportunities to share knowledge across different fields. And the city has taken a leadership role in kind of creating these opportunities where you can have industry leaders, academic researchers, and city staff come together to have these conversations, to set priorities, to face these challenges. I'll talk a little bit later, I think, about the specific programs that we have in place to tackle this, but it really comes from leadership, right? And the direction that, as a city employee, the direction that we have comes from City Council. So it's really motivating on the city staff's end that we have council that is looking towards creating policies and programs that are centered around equity, that are centered around climate action and resiliency. And it makes it easy for us to go out and to find these opportunities, right? Knowing that we have that backing from council, that we have that authority to go out and to foster these relationships. The opportunities kind of that comes out of this for the city is that we have now opportunities to share access to our infrastructures with our various partners in collaborations. So such as, our buildings, our streets, access to our vehicles, water, et cetera, specifically for applied research, but also, we have other programs which look into entrepreneurs kind of coming to the city and using these infrastructures, but also sharing our resources, our knowledge and data, right? Data sharing is really, really important part of this whole process. And then using the city as a reference, whether it's a partnership with a business, an entrepreneur, or a student or a researcher, right? The city as a reference can create new opportunities. Whether for a student it's jobs, right? It's building a talent through experiential learning opportunities with the city. For businesses and entrepreneurs working with the city, having the city as a reference helps in marketing what they're building and what they're creating. And another thing I think when we talk about opportunities within kind of innovation and these collaborations is there's an opportunity to bring together again various academic institutions, departments, city divisions, and communities, right? To tackle these priorities, to understand current trends, before this program in the city, there used to be, it used to be difficult to find alignment, right? Everyone worked in their own silos, and you still find it, right? It's still difficult, but with what we're doing now, we're finding that it's easier for staff now to align across divisions with similar research objectives. We found that through our work and our collaborations, we're bringing academic institutions and departments together across the city to work on similar issues, right? So breaking down these silos, I think, is an opportunity that we have kind of moving forward in the challenges that we face as a city.
Yeah, and I think that that's super important now, looking at ensuring that communities have a voice, and government sometimes can have the stigma of we're making decisions for you, and we know why we're making the decisions. Whereas it seems like bringing in stakeholders from academia and the business world and students and newcomers, it really starts to help show the full picture of potentially something that you're looking to innovate. And something that I would maybe want to just follow up with you on this is the idea of like policy innovation, because typically research and development is focused on technology-based widgets, gadgets, and invention. So has it been difficult in incorporating a research lens scope into policy innovation, whereas typically it's like you wouldn't think of that being researched? It would be more so just a decision that's made, and everyone needs to live with it. So what does that look like for the city to adapt it that way?
Yeah, it's been really, really important for the city reaching out to our academic partners to bring in research-based evidence in the decision-making moving forward. The divisions and city staff, traditionally, when they wanted to kind of look for reports and for data collection, they had one avenue, and that was to go to consultants, go to a consulting firm and kind of get their information there. But now we're moving towards opening this up to researchers, whether it's professors to students, and you're opening it up a bit, and to the sense that when you have an academic doing the research, they have, they own it, right? So they're guiding that research. They're bringing in their own ideas. Where if it's a consultant, usually it's, this is what we want as a city. This is exactly what we're looking for. You're going to provide something for us. Whereas the city is giving some of that up to the researchers, which is great, because this is how we bring innovation and new ideas, right? We're allowing them to come to us. We're not holding them back. They own the work, and then that's influencing, the decision makers around policies and around kind of the programs that the city is coming forward with. So it works great with policy, specifically around policy reviews, or looking at new policies that the city can create to support the community, right? And to support staff in supporting services and so forth.
Amazing. Yeah, really appreciate that. And at the tail end there, you talked about holding on to the research and that. And I think, Peter, this is a good segue for you looking at intellectual property, because typically individuals see intellectual property as, it's mine, get away from me, I don't want to share this with anyone, focusing on building up fence posts to build a fence around your innovation. So with IP being such a important concept and piece that people can really weaponize in innovation and working towards building up their business, how does IP, in your view, shape the influence of a broader landscape of collaborations in Ontario, and what should stakeholders really be attentive to?
Yeah, thanks for the question, and I'll maybe just set the stage a little bit, because sometimes people want to know, well, why do we even want to talk about IP? And if you look at 91% of the value of the S&P 500 is intangibles. That's $22 trillion valuation just in intangible assets on the S&P 500. When you bring that down to the business level, businesses that have IP are 3.5, 4 times more likely to export. They're 2 times more likely to be high growth. They're 11 times more likely to seek financing. There's a new report from the European Union that came out this week that SMEs that have a patent and like at least have 2 IP rights, so whether it's a patent and a trademark or a patent and a trade secret, are 10 times more likely to be funded at the venture capital level. So IP is actually an economic driver for companies and for the ecosystem as a whole. When we talk about IP in IP Ontario, we talk about it from the economic prosperity lens, right? There's lots of social economic pieces we can add to that, but fundamentally we can add economic prosperity to the province by making sure companies are protected. So where does that fit in collaboration? And I think to your point about IP sometimes is what's mine is mine, and I want to make sure I protect it. I think IP discussions and collaboration really set the tone for ownership. Who owns what today, and who owns what downstream rights in the future. A lot of organizations come in and think they need to own all their IP rights up front, and they think it's worth $1 million. But in reality, there's a lot of work to be done to move something from idea to invention to commercialization to market value. And there are many people in that chain that are going to have to add value to it. So IP rights, from a collaboration perspective, you really need to be conscious of what you're bringing to the table, but what your partners also need to bring to the table for you to move to the next step to actually create, monetary value or other economics or societal values out of that. So, the big piece around collaboration from our perspective is forcing that ownership discussion. And that is a double-edged sword. For some organizations, it forces them to realize they're actually giving away too much, and to maybe go back and look at their policies or back at their approaches. It does force the discussion, at a provincial level and at a country level as we invest in this IP. We invest in research, and if a multinational comes in and decides they like that and want to buy the company out, well, where's our downstream right? Where's the net benefit value for that IP transfer? Which is still a gray area. I think there's lots of value that can be added. So from that collaboration perspective, we force that, or we try to force that discussion early on. I think what that does is that gives us, we start to see clarity of where the supports are coming from inside the community, where the regional innovation centers, where the tech transfer offices, where the government, where the SMEs and other stakeholders all start to play. And that ownership discussion is really important. For collaboration to be really successful, and we'll talk about this maybe a little bit in the P3 discussion. IP is, well, 2 things. It's a non-rivalrous right, which means it can be split apart. Unlike if you have a car and you sell me the car moves to my name. But if you have, an IP right on something, you can sell me, the right to use it, and you can still retain the right. So you can start to split the rights. So it has the ability for groups like IP Ontario to work with other IP organizations inside the province and outside the province to figure out how we can, encourage stakeholders to start to either share rights or think about, if we can purchase some rights for protection, like some other IP groups are doing, how that right can be transferred. So that non-rivalrous piece is probably the first part. And then the second part is what people also need to think about in the collaborations and what we're trying to influence, especially on the stakeholder discussions, is IP rights are 20 years. And so you don't want to sell the farm too early, and you don't want to make sure you're signing off the rights today because there could be high value downstream. So the IP discussion really forces the longevity and the value chain discussion, which I think shapes how, going back to ownership, it's that ownership discussion starts. When you asked about what do stakeholders need to think about? And our answer is, well, there's many different types of stakeholders, and they all have to have a different lens on this. Regional innovation centers as a stakeholder, when they're part of the collaboration discussion, need to be supporting companies and making sure they're engaged and thinking about, their IP positions and IP rights. Universities that are earlier stage need to really nurture and set foundations on collaborations that enable SMEs to continue to grow and prosper inside Ontario and not just extracted straight from the university into another country, and we don't see any downstream benefit from that. Governments as a stakeholder, need to continue to support and the collaborations, which means understanding if we're giving innovation dollars to a stakeholder or downstream stakeholder, that IP needs to be part of that discussion, whether it's through strategic procurement, whether it's through innovation-based programming, and then companies that are smaller on the collaboration side need to realize, they actually have a position they can go and negotiate, and working with the RICs and the universities and the government or groups like myself for those support. So the short version, if I go back to first principles, is IP is really about economic prosperity, and where the landscape of collaboration intersects with that is forcing the discussion on ownership and downstream value and who owns that and where the net benefit ultimately ends up.
Yeah, and it seems like everyone has a piece to play in this, whether they're regional innovation centers or post-secondary institutions or the business themselves. I think that there are a lot of resources out there, but maybe you can just talk to this very briefly, is the idea that so many people are focused on the inputs and they're worrying about, tightening up the budget to make sure that their operation is profitable. They might not be thinking downstream a bit to protect their intellectual property. So with that, what resources are available in a general term to individuals who might have like an early idea and be an early stage startup? Should they be focusing on IP at that time? And are there resources available to guide individuals through that process?
The short answer is yes, and it will vary by the company type, perhaps, and their jurisdiction. But I'll go back and address your comment. I think, again, at first principles, I think every innovator that's working on something should think about IP. And if your decision is now's not the right time, or I don't think this is the type of IP right I need and I can wait, then that's fine. But to just ignore it is a bad thing. And I think working with some of these resources, if they're a researcher working through the tech transfer office, if they're working with a college, we've actually put some funding in, which I'll maybe talk about later in the P3 discussion, around how colleges are interacting with SMEs and companies to have research support and where IP fits in. So, but if you're a little bit upstream from that, working with regional innovation centers, we are starting to integrate with many of them in the province of Ontario about how we can provide kind of back-end support or making sure they're referring us to companies. But beyond that, there's actually quite a lot of other IP resources. 5 years ago, there was zero money, for the most part, put into intellectual property supports, apart from tech transfer offices that have been around for a long time. Right now, at last count, I think there's been upwards of 230, 250 million put in by federal and provincial governments across Canada. And that comes in the form of, there's a group called Innovation Asset Collective. They're a federal program. They support clean tech companies, specifically with IP supports, education, funding. There's IP Ontario. We have a substantial budget. It's on our website. It's I think $40 or $50 million allocated over the between last year, this year, next fiscal year to build IP programming. So working with us. There's also IP Assist, which is run through NRC. They have an allocation that's been set aside, and there's also Global Affairs has a program where they will actually help companies if they're doing exports on their IP filings, IP cost support. So there is actually a plethora of supports. IP is incredibly expensive. To get a patent costs $20,000, and you've got to allocate $100,000 over the next 3 to 5 years to do it well. If you're startup trying to make payroll, that's a hard piece. So again, a lot of sports, and I think back to the collaboration theme, IP Ontario is actually working with all these other groups. So we are actively, talking with Innovation Asset Collective, with IP Assist, with GAC on how, if we have common clients, how we can make sure they're supported. So very much encourage companies in the province to come chat with us. And again, there'll be some discussion later about some other programs that other institutions have that we've been supporting as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's incredibly more valuable now than ever for individuals to get into IP, and I think utilizing partners that already exist out there is silly not to. So, focusing on who are your allies and what resources are available that have already been built out, I think is increasingly more important. And looking at our friends at Laurentian University, I'll take this chance to swap over to Giselle. Looking at collaboration with universities and businesses, there might be a stigma that universities have typically focused on what they've created themselves, and that's the extent of it. And I know for a fact that that's not true based on, how much you do already with different businesses in the communities, and similar with universities across the province. But would love to understand a little bit more about the collaborative efforts that are initiated by Laurentian University, and if you could highlight, the role that academia really does play when it comes to province-wide collaborations, not only with businesses, but even with like other academia, and what that looks like to you now as the tides are somewhat changing, and there's more open to collaboration from the university front.
Thanks, Chris. Or sorry, Matt.
Is it Chris here?
I was thinking back to what Chris was saying about the cities. That kind of resonated with me. But yeah, I mean, I would say, like, I've been at Laurentian, like I said, for 16 years now, and I'm proud of the relationships that have been created over the years. Like Laurentian has done, yes, we've had our challenges. We all know that the last couple of years have been tough for us, but Laurentian has done incredibly well when it comes to partnerships with both the private sector and other agencies, whether it be universities in Ontario or across Canada and even internationally, and as well as some of the government agencies that are very relevant in some of the areas where we've excelled. So I'll give you a couple of examples. One is very specific to one particular research project, and then maybe focus a little bit more on some of the research centers that they have and the unique contributions that they make to creating knowledge, and as well as impacting potentially on policy and standards in their relevant areas. So the first one, again, is a research project that was launched at Laurentian about 5 years ago, and it is the largest research project ever undertaken by the university. So it was supported by the Canada First Research Excellence Fund, so the CFREF, and it's called Metal Earth. And Metal Earth is a $104 million applied research and development project, which was led by the university. We're obviously not doing this on our own, and we have a number of partners in academia and government agencies, such as, Ministry of Mines and Canadian Geological Society. We've got universities like U of T. We've got Université de Québec à Chicoutimi, Université d'Ottawa. And that's in addition to some of the company partners, like Noront, Agnico Eagle, Goldspot, Cobalt Power Group. Like these, it's a large project. It's been ongoing, like I said, for about 5 years. Initially, it was foreseen as 7-year project. As you can imagine, a pandemic will influence on exploration projects and kind of ground things to a halt for a while. So. Yeah. So that project is, we've recently been granted an extension, so it'll be going for a few more years, and that one, it's, we consider ourselves Canada's mining university, and basically the aim of the project is to transform the understanding of like the genesis of base and precious metals, during the Earth's evolution, and with the focus on critical minerals. This is very relevant to Canada and globally in with regard to the supply chain, right? And trying to figure out what's where those deposits are. It's not a project aimed at finding deposits, but to refine the mechanisms for determining where there could be deposits. So that's one research project. And the other thing that I wanted to point out too with that one is that there's been a lot of follow-on projects. Part of my role at Laurentian is, managing research agreements. So, I see these partnerships coming through, and, anywhere from $1 million alliance grant. Previously it was CRD programs, but we've seen relationships start through Metal Earth and evolve into a different project, and we've also done smaller projects with smaller exploration companies. So moving on from that, just wanted to highlight a couple of the research centers, just because of the multidisciplinary approach that they bring, the unique approach, and the partnerships that they have. So the first one would be what we call the Cooperative Freshwater Ecology Unit. I believe it's the only research center in Canada that's been set up as a co-op. And so it's housed within the the Valley Living with Lakes Center, just building part of our campus where, fresh water, goes directly into the center itself. And there's space in there that's shared with the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and the Ministry of the Environment. And there's been a number of projects that have been taken on over the years with the support of Vale and Glencore, as well as Canadian Forestry Service, Natural Resources Canada, and so the knowledge that's generated is incredible, and again, very relevant topics like vulnerable ecosystems, climate change, invasive species, and urban development. So that's just again, just a very brief synopsis of some of the work. I'd like to also highlight one of the research centers that is actually supported by the Ministry of Labor. So just recently, we renewed a 5-year operational support program from Ministry of Labor to support CROSH, which is the Center for Research in Occupational Safety and Health, right? And they do some really interesting projects and research that impact on occupational health and safety with the potential to change policy. There's one that's been in the news in the last year around diesel, right? The use of diesel underground. So they partnered with the United Steelworkers on a diesel particulate project that could impact on standards for the mining industry. And the last one that I'll just highlight quickly is Merarco, and again, it's also a very unique research center in that it is separately incorporated and it is owned by Laurentian, and it is applied research center here on our campuses, and it's focusing on developing innovative technologies for sustainable global mining practices, right? And there's some really interesting work taking place there. There's the CEO Nadia Mikachuk is working on a center for mine waste biotechnology that is being proposed for the industry and looking at innovative solutions for rehabilitating mines and mine tailings. So that's one that I've been really excited to support, and potentially looking at using some of the resources from IPON to further develop, the policies and, how they want to manage intellectual property once that center is up and running.
Yeah, and what you're spelling out here is that this research is leading to real world change and real world benefits. And I think, the idea that universities produce a lot of basic or early stage research isn't the case, and it's obvious that there is these collaborations and these partnerships that are driving real world change through the research that is being done at universities, which I think is incredibly important, especially when we look at the value of research and how much money goes into research, showcasing that there are applicable opportunities with businesses to be able to use them and then work with you to create these changes that they see. And I think that brings us to our next point here, looking at public and private partnerships. The collaboration agreements where public and private sectors both invest resources and share risks and responsibilities, and the rewards really of the provisions of the private sector or the infrastructure. Typically these triple Ps, public-private partnerships, are used for large prospects for building and operating like hospitals and schools and transport systems. But when looking at how they're effectively used for research and creating these collaborations, I want to touch on highlighting some partnerships that Laurentian University has done with this, and that they've significantly impacted both research, and the commercialization aspect, because I think that that's a really important part, is looking at the research translating into something that is commercialized. So if you could talk a little bit about that, I think that'd be really beneficial.
Yeah, happy to address that. And, just to give sort of my perspective, from the university side, like, yes, commercialization is important. And so I'm going to talk about three different examples, but there's also other outputs from that research that I think are really important. So the first one is, when I was thinking about this project the other day, when I joined Laurentian, I remember this project being highlighted because it was the largest MyTax cluster grant awarded in the agency's history. And the fact that this researcher, Dr. John Ashley Scott, is still working with the original partner. At the time, it was Xstrata Nickel, which is now Glencore. And so Dr. Scott has been, working with them for at least 15 years. During that time, he's received over almost $1.5 million from MyTax to support the development of HQP. So when you think about the number of graduate students that have been supported through that collaboration, it's just outstanding. And he said, like, all of those students that he's supported, and I believe there's been over 20 master's and PhD students supported just through, so there's, the MyTax, again, one, almost $1.5 million. And then from NSERC, there was another 300,000. And that's not even including the amount of money received from Glencore and the in-kind, right? So you're looking at over 20 grad students that have gone on to graduate and go and work in relevant industries. Some of them have been hired by Glencore, and others have gone on to other similar jobs. And this research that's again focusing on the critical minerals, and the last one that was just awarded is using CO2 and heat emitted during the smelting process to grow unique microalgae, and for use in anti-cancer compounds and health beneficial antioxidants. I remember at the beginning of my career going out to Glencore, it was Xstrata at the time, and going out onto the rooftop of the smelter to see where the algae was growing. So, it's an amazing, and it demonstrates the value that our industry partner sees in this relationship and the outputs, to keep going and to keep investing into this partnership. The second one that I wanted to highlight is actually the very first file that I managed as a tech transfer officer when I started here at Laurentian. We had an inventor, Dr. Amedeo Paracenti, who'd made a discovery, basically looking at biopsies to determine whether or not a patient was responding to chemotherapy. So those was a breast cancer biopsy and technology, and it's evolved into other types of cancers in recent years. But it's been really gratifying to see that partnership evolve, because initially, once, Peter talked about the cost of patenting and this type of technology, we're really excited, even though it was early stage and it needed a lot of investment. We really saw the impact that it could have on a person's cancer trajectory and treatment and outcomes, right? So we licensed out the technology over 15 years ago to a startup called RNA Diagnostics, and that partnership continues to this day, where it's been supported by MyTax, and we have ongoing collaborative efforts. And it's very much focused on commercialization at this stage. And yes, there's training of HQP, but the company, is looking to further develop these technologies to, for the purpose of increasing, not just support to cancer patients, but to improve their outcomes, right? So yeah, and then the last one that again, different focus, and that's a partnership that we've undertaken with 3 other universities just in the last year. Um, Universities, you know, as Peter said, tech transfer is expensive. The investment into commercialization and patents, we're not funded. We don't receive funding to support those activities. So an opportunity came up for us to work with other universities in the north and sort of the rural area. So we're working with Lakehead, Trent, and Nipissing to look at, look at critical minerals and look at clean tech and the BEV sectors, right? And what are the assets? What are the, in each of our communities and each of our universities to support, the development of those technologies and potentially to commercialize them. So it's an ongoing project. We have a shared resource that's, an industry liaison officer that's shared between the 4 universities. And part of the support that we receive from IPON for this is funding around IP services. So we're in the process right now. I've had some great conversations this week, so I'm really excited to pursue those in identifying the companies that could take advantage of the funding that we have to support the commercialization activities.
Amazing. Yeah, and just hearing, that there is a lot of investment needed, and it certainly is a barrier, but working with collaborative partners might lighten that load a little bit because each other has buy-in. There's an ability to apply for grants together and ultimately being able to work on a project with somebody else that is also trying to accomplish the same goals, I think is increasingly more important, but it's also easier to do more now than ever. So being able to leverage that, especially with multiple different post-secondary institutions and multiple different universities, is really neat. And the last project that you're talking about there, IPON related and IP related, I think is a great change over to Peter to bounce the ball back to you here. And looking at how IPON works towards enhancing these effective partnerships and ensuring that innovators are protected while making IP accessible to their partners, because that's a bit convoluted. And actually, I even saw a question in the chat here asking about, does the emphasis on IP and patents, which provide exclusive rights, conflict with the idea that there is an inclusive innovation? So would love to hear your ideas on that.
Yeah, so just to think about the structure, if we maybe use the example of university partnering with an SME or multinational, or with basically a private company as the P3 example, from that lens, that I think about how do we enhance it? It's more how do we reduce the friction for it to happen, and we have better line of sight to downstream net benefits that could happen out of the project. And where IPON fits in that, and where we work or we're starting to work to engage, is saying we have those supports to provide the SME on the other side, or again, as the example Giselle gave, we're working with actually 5 colleges and 1 cluster of universities, which is the one Giselle referenced, around how we can provide additional supports through funding, through access to IP funding, but also access for talent to make sure they can have those IP discussions as part of the P3 collaborative P3 discussion. I think about our role it's really to provide kind of independent advice through the lens of IP as a long-term right, and we want people to understand and be supported with funding to do that if they want to make sure they have value in that downstream partnership, that they know what is needed and they know what IP rights are needed. If I look at the way I would describe us perhaps giving some advice on or suggestions on to open discussion on where would we go with the P3 partnership. Like if 2 companies came to us, or if the government came to us and said we're doing this partnership, how do we structure this IP clause, which I think is what the question's starting to go towards. I would actually go up a level and say, well, what's the net benefit we need out of this project downstream? Is it jobs? Is it we need access to the data that's coming out of it so other researchers can use it? Is it we need ownership of that data so we can have that IP right inside the province, or inside the research institution, so they can keep building on it and do additional spin-offs? Is it making sure that if there's a a partnership, and let's say it's a larger company like a multinational, that you're going to make sure you have room set aside in the research outputs to make sure you're working with Ontario-based or Canadian-based companies to help deliver that? Is it building that knowledge base, building the capacity, building the talent? So when we think about intellectual property and ownership, it lets us have that net benefit discussion and say, well, if you want to own it, what are the other net benefits we're going to get out of it that make it worthwhile? And when I think about, the question that was asked about, does the emphasis on IP and patents, do they give exclusive right, and does that conflict with a priority of inclusivity? This is why IP is a very nuanced piece to unpack. It's not a binary, this is the general direction you go. I would say, well, what does inclusive mean? Inclusive to every company based in Ontario, every company based in Canada? Do we want to actually make sure we want to exclude certain jurisdictions or certain sectors from having access to this? So what the IP discussion does is it starts the basis to say, if we own it, you can control who has access to it. You don't have to preclude them from having access to it, but it lets you have that downstream right to control it. I talk about, patents actually don't give you the right to do anything. They give you the right to prevent others from doing things, right? And so if you have that right, you can say it's fair and it's open, but for others, you could say, I would like a royalty, please, because, the provincial government, the Canadian government invested in that. And if you're coming into the country, it gives that lever. So I think when I think about P3s and where IP Ontario fits, it's starting that discussion, funding some groups such as, we called it the PSC pilot. We had a $2 million fund set aside for that last year. And it's really putting that talent into place in certain colleges, universities. And then we also have our programming. So again, if companies are working with us and they're doing one of our clients might be doing a P3 discussion, we can encourage them and coach them as well. So it's not a direct enhancement. I would call it, it's a support piece that has the long-term tenure in place. And you know what, I think the way I would, if I was to characterize it maybe in one soundbite, it's we're basically trying to build the environment for IP to be embedded and supported. If you want to have a P3 discussion and you want to understand how the IP rights need split apart, where do you go for that support? There's some tech transfer offices can do it, but some can't. Where's their provincial level resource? And that's the piece that we bring to the table.
Yeah, and I know that, working on our Ontario Collaborative Innovation Platform, we see a significant amount of businesses that come through that are in different stages of their innovation. But I think one common thing is just the unknown of IP, and there are some players in the ecosystem that do help out. But I think that what IPON is starting to do now and creating the conversation, because now it's about education and making sure that people know, the tools that are available to them, and being able to show them one direction, one place to get the resources from a trusted partner who is everything IP, has been really helpful to OCIP to be able to say, here are the resources that you need. And I love how you characterize it as not necessarily protecting like what you have, but limiting what others can do with it. And I think that is a really nice way and succinct way to say, you own it and you still have the ability to share it with other individuals should you want to. It just makes sure that those hostile actors are kept at bay when it comes to exporting the innovations and IP that Canadians do create. So yeah, thank you for that. That's amazing. And looking at urban innovation and city innovation, I think I'm going to turn it back to Chris, who kicked us off here. The City of Toronto implementing and fostering this public-private collaboration. You're sat uniquely in a position where your stakeholders are from both sides. You're working with the higher education institutions that are in the City of Toronto, and you're also working with the businesses that are growing up in the city. So where do you see these collaborations heading in the future, and how does the City of Toronto have like a role to play in it?
Yeah, I guess the cities has moved towards creating, various entrance points of how, whether it's researchers or businesses or entrepreneurs can work with the city. We have, for example, Civic Lab TO, which is a program that eCampus supports, My Tax Supports, which centers around our research collaborations with Toronto's universities and colleges. We have two accelerate programs. We have the Green Market Acceleration Program and the Toronto Civic Accelerate Program, which looks at supporting businesses, entrepreneurs with proof of concept and demonstration pilots with the cities. And then we also have the unsolicited proposal process that we're actually, it's actually under review right now. But that's another way that, people can come to the city to work with the city. So creating these mechanisms, I think, is really important. When we talked about the city's role, I think it plays an important role, and it's a unique role because the city has a direct pulse on what the community needs, right? Whether it's through council or whether it's through city staff that work directly with the various communities around the city, we have that insight, which we can support kind of where the research is heading, right? So, for example, with Civic Lab TO, the city can use that mechanism to put out calls or challenges to help look for innovative solutions to the housing crisis, right? Using OCIP, which has been a great platform, we can, city staff can say, we're looking for innovative solutions to creating more housing opportunities in this area of the city. Put that call out. Now that call goes out to each one of the city's colleges and universities, and everyone has an opportunity to put in an expression of interest with their ideas of how the city can solve this. And then that can form these discussions between city staff, researchers who are experts in the field, to come together to help solve these issues. So I think it's kind of moving forward in the future. I think taking advantage of these programs is really important. And part of that is, and the role of the city and the role of my position is to promote the program, right? To let people know that it's there, to help people participate, but then having this understanding that, oftentimes, and I've seen this in kind of my experience with the city, sometimes you have these researchers who do this great work, go out to the communities, kind of do their research, but then they hold it at the university and the city doesn't have access to it, or they don't even know that that the research was happening until the city goes to do the same type of research. And then they find out through the community leaders that, hey, X university was here and, they already came to us with these same questions, right? So I think it's important to have those dialogues, to create mechanisms and tools where, we're bringing people together to have these conversations. One, so we're not repeating the same work, but then also that we're sharing the data, right, with each other, kind of moving forward. And creating the opportunities, right, for this research to happen, right, and development to happen.
Yeah, and I think that's really neat because, oftentimes the research comes from the data provided by, let's say, the individuals who are living there or the community members. But then that data never goes back to them, and it's just kept stored away. So the ability to have this transparency over the outcomes and be able to influence the decisions and actually see, these changes happen in their communities, I think is especially important. And it validates the idea that research is needed to get the ideas, to get the concepts, but the change does follow after that. So looking at how that's affected, especially a city as diverse as Toronto, inclusion and diversity is at the forefront of that. So making sure that everyone's voice is heard is increasingly more important. And not to stray away from you, Chris, because I'll come back to you, but Giselle, I think this is a great point. Looking at diversity and inclusion, the university has a great approach to making sure that individuals are able to access resource in the higher education institution systems. Now, looking at Laurentian University specifically, taking the acts that individuals are getting into the system and attending the university is great, but ensuring that diversity and inclusion is at the forefront of the research and development initiatives. How does that work with the university, and how does this shape the university's research projects and the decisions that you make?
So I recently completed a 3-year term on a board. It's an international association, but primarily based in the U.S. It's called Autumn, and we went through a strategic planning process when I was on the board, and that whole process really reinforced to me is that EDI, it should wrap around everything that we do, and it is not necessarily something that one individual or one office does, right? So we have to take that EDI lens to every process, everything that we do within an institution. I think most organizations really need to sort of adopt that lens, and that's really important to us here at Laurentian University, where we are a bilingual and a tricultural institution, right? So we need to adopt that lens. I've been privileged to have worked with my vice president of research here, Dr. Tammy Eager, who, when she became interim vice president, and then eventually moved on to the role permanently, she had literally just completed a leadership program for women in STEM. It's a year-long global program where it's 100 cohort program, and she was on her way back. At the end of it, they do a trip out to the Arctic, the whole global cohort, and so she was literally coming back from that when she took the reins here at the Office of Research at Laurentian. And so she's been an outstanding leader for us here at the university. So currently, we are in the process. We did have an EDI research advisor that was working in the office of the vice president of research. That individual recently left. So we're just in the process of hiring for that position again. But that advisor, traditionally has been available to meet with researchers and research teams one-on-one to talk about their, training for HQP, both at the faculty and at the student level. When a project like Metal Earth, right, you're looking at a very male-dominated industry, so EDI is an important consideration, when you're doing field research. And I have a daughter who's just graduated from the University of Ottawa in geology, and just even like attending PDAC and being surrounded, like poster sessions, like just making sure that our students feel comfortable and secure in their environments. So that's an important component of that kind of position. We're developing training and also supporting the Research Ethics Board, who oftentimes will need access to elders and Indigenous knowledge keepers when they're reviewing research projects. So right now, Laurentian is going through an operational transformation. So we're making sure that new processes that are developed, include leading practices to support diverse hiring. Other initiatives that I've supported here, honorariums, paying honorariums to knowledge keepers, right? And I've attended webinars in the last year, University of Calgary, UBC. Like, this is a common issue that we face across Canada is how do we compensate Indigenous research participants, and making sure that it's done in a culturally appropriate way. And then, in my day-to-day, I would say here at Laurentian, part of my responsibility is I have oversight for a center. Is called the Jim Fielding Innovation and Commercialization Center. So we do, we do a lot of entrepreneurship support, a lot of education. Just in the last month, I've given a couple of IP talks there to grad students, to other class, capstone engineering class. But we also have pitch competitions, and we connect with, the resources in our community and our entrepreneurs. But one thing I've noted is that we have a lot of participation from international students, right? So I feel like that innovation center is that hub. Our pitch competition this year featured 3 international students, in different sectors, and really happy to support those. The last IP talk that I had, it was interesting because I think 95% of the participants were international students. At the end, nobody asked any questions, but then they all approached me, like quite a few approached me individually to say, how do I get involved in research? It wasn't even around intellectual property, but they wanted to know, how do we, they're coming in from different countries, and they may not have those relationships with companies or even their faculty where they don't know as well. So they're really looking for, help, and they want to be active in research and in some of the activities. And the last thing that, I would highlight as, and I know that other universities do it as well, so, it's working with their communities as well. A few weeks ago, participated in a roundtable with the mayor's office on incorporating, like making sure that our city is a welcoming place, and incorporating EDI practices into what the city is doing. And, particularly as we have international students, one thing that Laurentian did for a few years and was interrupted by the pandemic, and, we would like to return to that, is hosting an annual International Day for Women and Girls in Science. And those were, we invited local schools, looking at grades 4 to 6, I think it was at the time, and both boys and girls, right, to normalize women in science and the opportunities. And, it was a lot of work, when you have 200 students, and you're trying to have different stations for them to learn about the opportunities. Like, this is all some of the great work that, colleges and universities, and, when we did ours, again, we partnered with Snow Lab, we partnered with Cambrian and Mariade colleges and different, partners in our community that are involved in research.
Yeah, and I think something powerful that you mentioned there is, showing to individuals that people that look like them, sound like them, talk like them are able to achieve these things that they might have not been able to perceive it otherwise, because it might be a very specific group of people who are in that field, be it men or individuals who aren't of color, or even individuals with disabilities. And I think another thing that you highlighted there is the idea that research isn't done on communities, it's done with communities, and being able to incorporate their voices, their ideas and reasonings, and methodologies even, especially when we look at Indigenous research, being able to recognize that different tools and different theories and ways of practice are considered research. And just because from a Western lens, it doesn't necessarily qualify for some check boxes that we've arbitrarily put in, these need to be incorporated. So I think that this EDI lens, like you said, being wrapped around everything we do is increasingly more important, and being able to have these voices shared loud and clear to make sure that we're informing our decisions based on the community that is typically at the forefront of the studying being done. And, not to switch away too quickly, but with the city of Toronto, I think that cultural richness, as you mentioned before, Chris, and as Giselle's referenced here, it translates into success, and it really starts to look at how this richness in the innovation sector and what strategies are in place to ensure that these voices are being not only heard, but also leading research and development initiatives. So, Chris, could you talk a little bit about how the City of Toronto, not only acknowledges but leverages and amplifies the diversity for success?
Yeah, so I think to start with, I think having good policies and setting up priorities helps, right? So the city does have strong policies and priorities around equity, diversity, and inclusion. So, that really guides staff in how we administer our programs and services around the city. There's also, I think it was couple of years ago or last year, we introduced the Reconciliation Action Plan, right? Which is also a really important resource for city staff to help in our work kind of moving forward around reconciliation. We have the Indigenous Affairs Office, which is a great resource for staff. Anytime we have questions or need resources, they're available to support us. The Confronting Anti-Black Racism Office as well is really important. Again, another really important resource for staff. But apart from policies and priorities, it's also important that as a city, we provide education and training opportunities for staff, and also making resources accessible to staff, right? And having all of these in place really helps us in administering our programs and ensuring that we are, guided by diverse voices, and that we're not excluding people in the way we administer our programs, but also that we're creating opportunities for diverse voices to participate in the city's decision-making process. For example, there's one research project we're working on with the Toronto Metropolitan University, and this is a research program that came through OCIP, and the city is looking at reviewing our unsolicited proposal process, ensuring that it's more equitable. So in order to complete this, we've reached out to our the Indigenous Affairs Office, asking to see what their connections were or contacts were with, businesses and entrepreneurs in the city. Again, confronting anti-Black racism. They were an amazing resource for us to understand kind of how we reach out to Black businesses in the city. Mm-hmm. So I think having these in place really help. There's one more tool that the city does have. It's called the Equity Lens tool, which allows any city program to basically it's an online platform that city staff can plug in their the program that they're working on, and it helps guide them to see if they're missing anything. Are they excluding a community from the city that is equity deserving? And also provides them with a statement that they can include in their resources around equity. So I think these steps are really important for the city in helping to ensure that our collaborations foster diversity and are focused on inclusion.
Yeah, and I think it's really neat that you said that it's not about just like involving individuals, but it's also about being knowledgeable about who you might be excluding, and it most likely is not on purpose. It's just an oversight, and having a tool like you said, the Equity Lens tool, is a really neat tool that I think a lot of other organizations could really incorporate, because it's not about what they know, but it's about what they're missing and what they don't know, and that could even be more important or detrimental to the success of a program. Specifically when trying to involve communities that you might not have a lot of resources in. So hearing that they have resources, the City of Toronto with the Indigenous Affairs Office, I think it's always great to consistently educate your own staff to make sure that everyone that you are serving is feeling included in that way. And finally, I think, Peter, looking at IPON and the approach to inclusivity with the services, there's such a wide range of innovators. And making sure that everyone has access to the tools, is important. So how does IPON currently, ensure that there is diverse perspectives influencing the broader IP landscape and the services that are available?
Yeah, so thank you for that. I'll maybe talk about it from EDI and non-EDI, because I would actually talk about diversity from the EDI, what people would traditionally think, but also there's other aspects we look at. We're an early stage startup. We're only a 1-year-old agency, so we're just building up our first programs right now. And we're looking to model after some of the other IP-based programs that are looking at, the EDI specific lens. For example, Innovation Asset Collective, where they do funding calls for women-led programs, and we're not quite there yet. It's in our pathway to get there and start to have more specific calls, because we're actually literally just launching our scale-up plans the last few weeks and getting off the ground. But it is top of mind for us, and I think back to, there's been a lot of work done, actually from Windsor University and also the federal government on, where systematic barriers are for certain underrepresented groups, and they've been able to identify where some of those challenges are. So us taking that feedback loop and feeding it into our products and services, I think is a very important part of our process. The other thing I reflect upon on the EDI lens is, 2 years ago, I sat in on a consultation with an Indigenous group out west, and we talked about their IP challenges. And we actually had about 8 consultation groups there by technology sector, various different approaches, the PSC sector, so lots of different stakeholders. But we had one specific group I was invited to listen in on the Indigenous side, and their questions and concerns about how IP rights work for their community was very different from every other group. Just because, how do you protect your traditional knowledge? How do you make sure a large company isn't taking your carving design and mass producing it? They also have the same IP questions that many other entrepreneurs would have, but there's a different lens of complexity. So I'm not saying we have the answer to that, but discussions have been started, and it's a very hard piece to unpack that we're starting to think about downstream. This isn't an IP Ontario problem to solve. It's actually Canada-wide problem that needs looked at, both from the minority perspective, the underrepresented groups, as well as things like the Indigenous lens. But I'll talk about what we're doing for what you might not consider traditional under the EDI, but is diversity from our perspective. We are looking at supporting companies to make sure we have representation across the province. I know my team is actually, I think they're up in meeting with NORCAT this week, which is one of the incubators up north, and they're having a push to make sure we can have more companies applying from that. We look at diversity from the perspective of where are companies coming in from the TRL level? Do we have a representation coming out of early stage research as much as we have late stage research? We look at diversity from the perspective of which tech sectors are we supporting. Life science is incredibly sophisticated when it comes to intellectual property because they have to work with the pharma companies, and the discussion of currency is intellectual property. So when we do a call, life science companies know they need the help or want the support, and they can line up. Whereas we go to the automotive sector, they're very early stage. They're looking at being tier 1 or tier 2, maybe even tier 3 suppliers. IP for them is a different discussion than the life science. It's not as complicated. So we're trying to work on both how we reach these groups, but also the services we provide. The other things that our services are starting to consider is that people don't think about, but come with the nuance of intellectual property. There's a ton of diversity when it comes to intent and policy. Inventor-owned institutions versus researcher-owned institutions. So, for example, you've got an innovation coming out from a researcher, they can take it and run with it, but other institutions, which means they have to fund it and pay for it, but other institutions have a tech transfer office behind them that they can tap into, right? So how are we making sure we have equitable access from that? There's some institutions or some trains of thought around we should be fully open source and we should, essentially give everything away if it's based on researcher money, versus the protection mindset of making sure we protect it for downstream, optionality, which is what I talked about. You can always decide to, give it away for free, but you can't decide to not have somebody, extract it from you if you don't have those rights. So for us, there's the EDI lens, but then there's also the realities of we have researchers, entrepreneurs, and SMEs at many different stages in many different sectors, and how do we make sure we have programs that match their needs is kind of what we're focused on, both those pieces equally, because they're both equally important. So again, a bit of a different lens on diversity. For us, it's EDI plus, but both are very important and require a lot of thought and nuance that we're working towards.
Wow. Yeah, a lot to unpack there. And I think that something, that you highlighted is that it's not an IPON problem. It's not an Ontario problem. This is Canada and worldwide. And I think that the more that we learn from, the collective groups that are also in the same sphere as us, trying to accomplish the same goals, there's no need to reinvent something that everyone is currently working on. So I think being able to collaborate even on just internal policies is something that is oftentimes overlooked. So thank you for raising that. I do just want to announce that there is a demographic poll that is being sent out. This is just some information about you. If you're able to fill in the information for CSPC, and we're wrapping up the last 10 minutes of the program here. So if you do have any final questions that are being listed, then fantastic. We can go ahead and answer those. I don't see any currently in the Q&A, so I'll go ahead and just kind of wrap up with our final thoughts here. And if any questions do come in, then we're happy to answer those. But looking at everything that we unpacked today, collaboration obviously is at the forefront of everyone's mind, and it's about understanding how to access it and who's interested in doing the work together. So from the three of you, can you just leave us with your final thoughts about how to find individuals that are also interested in collaborating on something that is important not only internally but again across the province and the country? What are the best ways to jump into these collaborative relationships? And what are the main focuses that you think can be like a driving force when it comes to the outcomes from them? And I think I'll just maybe continue on with Giselle here as she's lifted up her hand to give us her first little bit of final thoughts.
I think that's a really good question. And, and for me, one of the best ways to find those people, those kindred spirits that want to collaborate, is to put your hand up and volunteer. Whether it's to support your professional development or, in your own personal life, right? But for me, my career, my entire career trajectory has sort of evolved because of volunteering experiences. Years ago, I volunteered with the Alumni Association here at Laurentian University, and I had taken a pause in my career, and when I decided to go back to work because of the experience that I had on the alumni board. And that has evolved over the years to, volunteering for my, professional association, whether it's the Canadian Tech Transfer Professionals, whether it's Autumn, which is a global professional development, right? And you find those people that, are willing to collaborate with you. Most recently working with other institutions like Trent, Lakehead, and Nipissing, that came out of sharing our knowledge and supporting each other through the creation of our commercialization policies that all of the post-secondary institutions were required to create. And then again on our annual commercialization plans, right? We're small institutions, and our perspective is very different than say U of T or a McMaster, where we have less resources. So collaboration is extremely important. So that's from my personal career advancement. And again, and I work with my community, and that leads to other collaborative research opportunities, right? But again, is volunteering and getting involved.
Yeah, putting your hand up there, because unless you're going to do it for yourself, no one's going to do it for you. And far too often, people hold in these ideas or the wants, and I think that you really don't know who's interested until you start that conversation. So that's really, really great. Thank you, Giselle. Peter, do you want to follow that up?
Yeah, so I'll maybe probably put more emphasis on that. I think when I look back to where both personally, professionally, as well as where I've seen collaborations happen in real life, it's all come down to the serendipity of people talking and understanding what's happening. I used to work for a multinational many years ago, and getting out of the office and into the multinational headquarters, and coffee discussions became where you figured out how projects work together. Even they're two different countries, and you're like, hey, we're doing the same technology brick. Why can't we collaborate on that? And even at the research institution level, or even cross institution, I think keeping your ears and eyes open for what's moving, because you never know when those connections are going to be made. So that's probably the biggest piece. We're IP Ontario, we don't fit in yet. We do have plans down the road to understand we have IP held by institutions, and is there a way we can connect that to marketplace is a question we're trying to understand. So we're trying to figure out how we can force those serendipitous connections, but it really comes down to getting out. It's very easy to stay on Zoom calls and keep them short for half an hour, but face-to-face discussions, it's the after discussion as to where the ideas for collaboration happens. And it doesn't happen every time, and not every time successful, but you have more wins than losses if you get out of the office and walk the halls.
Yeah, and love to see that that's changing. The amount of conferences that I've been able to attend this year has been great, and it is great to see the 3D version of people rather than the 2D. So, the conversations that happen after the 30-minute time is typically the most important. So I agree with that, Peter. And Chris, do you want to finish this off here?
Sure, yeah. The one thing I think that's important is leveraging existing networks and partnerships. In our experience specifically with Civic Lab TO, leveraging eCampus Ontario's network or MyTax's networks has really helped us kind of foster our relationships with academic institutions. On the other hand, it's also important to leverage existing research centers and networks. As Giselle mentioned, there's a long list of research centers that she's involved with. That there's people that have come together that are doing a lot of this work that the city is interested in, right? So understanding what's out there and then kind of making those connections and leveraging these, what's already there. In my experience, just working with Civic Lab TO, we've found that there's so many groups that are working on similar issues that the city has, and it's been great to kind of create these new relationships with these groups, and just the research that comes out of these new relationships is great and promising kind of for the future.
Amazing. I couldn't agree more. Keeping the conversation going, and that's one of the ideas here is keeping the conversation going from this conversation here and throughout the conference. I know many of you will be attending the in-person, so I look forward to that. And you can keep the conversation going on social media. They've highlighted CSPC 2023 as the hashtag. But as we close, these enlightened discussions, I want to express my deepest appreciation to the Canadian Science Policy Centre for organizing these pre-conference sessions, and to our brilliant panelists. Thank you, all three of you, all so much. Your expertise, I think, has really shed some light on the complexities of the innovation ecosystem, but it's also kind of charted a course of putting your hand up and making sure the conversation's continuing going, and volunteering and just getting involved and having those conversations that are meaningful and incorporating the community into those conversations. So thank you for all of our audience members who have attended, and the engaging question that we did have. You've made this conversation a little bit more robust and dynamic, so excited for that. And you can check out the CSPC website and the final pre-conference panel that's happening tomorrow. And look forward to seeing some of you in Ottawa. We are hosting, eCampus Ontario is hosting a panel on Monday at noon. So excited to keep the momentum going and take what we've learned here from our panelists and through the discussions, and involve the communities and the workplaces and bring some real change. Stay curious, stay inspired and invested in what's going on. So thank you all so much for attending. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you to CSPC for putting this on. There will be a rating of the session at the very end, and I think if there's anything else to be said from the CSPC team, I'll hand it over now, but if not, I want to appreciate everyone's time and thank you for coming.